We're starting a few minutes late because those of you who were in the plenary colloquy session ran a little bit late, so wanted to make sure to give some good time for this great in-between time between the sessions. The sessions are great, I hope you enjoy this one, but the in-between chance to meet with current students, faculty, and former students, faculty, and friends from the community is really great. But thanks for coming in to talk about not just what we do here, but what we do elsewhere, and those from other places who come here to make us do what we do here better. So I'll start us off by doing a couple of quick introductions so you see who's here today. And then we'll introduce what we're bringing to the table for a basis of discussion, what our international experiences have been here in the department and the school. And then we've got some questions. I've got some questions. I hope you brought questions and some questions arise that you can bring to this discussion. We are sitting in the round as a group, and I hope that we can all have a good discussion looking back at our work here so that we can chart our course forward. So I am a faculty member here in the Department of Architecture. My name is Bohm. I'm an assistant professor of architecture. I'm aligned with the Ecological Practices Research Group. So those of you who are current students or who have been to our program in the recent years know what that means. And I focus on both ecological oriented design and performance as well as environmental systems. So from an international experiences perspective, what I'll talk about briefly is that I've taught in the Sustainable Futures program, the Costa Rica Study Abroad program. I've taught in that since 2011 and have co-directed the program since 2012. And what some of you who may already know that about me might not know is that I also lived overseas for 2 years in Japan and taught there before I went back to graduate school. So I have the experience of living abroad over a longer period of time as well as guiding a program of students going every summer. And I'll talk about that program in a few moments, and I see that we were recently joined by the founder of that program, who I will also mention as I do the introduction to that. But joining me on the panel, I have three colleagues who are here to share their experiences and help us with some of this reflective exercise. And so in the order that I think we'll be presenting today, to my left is Professor Ken MacKay, who's been teaching here at UB in architectural design studios since 1988. He's got an undergraduate degree from Colgate University, graduate studies in architecture from Georgia Tech, and he got his master's here at UB. So Kenneth has been involved with study abroad since '91. He says he left his wife and 3 children home to go overseas. Yeah, and laughs about it now. To spend 17 days with the Barcelona program, which Bonnie Out will be talking about as well, which was then run by Professor John Archie and Arthur Chen. So that was looking at projects from the Barcelona Olympics, new projects, old projects within the city, and then doing some travel throughout southern Spain and Portugal. So more recently, Ken has been centered around the study abroad program he started in '05 in Ireland, and then expanded it in more recent years to do a kind of cross-country circumnavigation tour, looking at major cities within the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and then also went to Scotland in the more recent version of the program. So, and in addition to that, Ken has a kind of umbrella task within the school to be the director of study abroad program, within the department. So works to develop new study abroad programs, and then is the intermediary between us here in our department and the University Study Abroad office. So thank you, Ken, for joining us. I'll also introduce Camden Miller, who is a PhD student in our newer PhD program in the Urban and Regional Planning department. And she works on housing, community development, and neighborhood planning. And is working now, and I'm not sure how much of this will be inspired by the work in Estonia, but is working on projects involving housing market dynamics, and specifically looking at limitations and exclusions of people of color and low income. And has a number of awards for her work to date, and is also a graduate of our Master of Urban Planning program. Before coming to UB, she was another one coming to us from Berkeley, as our dean likes to say, the UB of the West. And so has a Bachelor of Science in Conservation Resource Studies from Berkeley, and a minor in Urban Design and a minor in Music. And she'll be here to provide some reflection based on her work in Estonia with Professor Dan Haas's program, taking a group of planning students to Estonia. She was there in the summer of 2015 and is speaking in part on his behalf about that program. So thank you for bringing us that experience. And then last, to Camden's left, is Professor Emerita Bonnie Ott, who also has a West Coast connection. So she got her MArch from UCLA and is licensed and practiced architecture in San Francisco, in New York, and in Buffalo, and has taught at UPI, at Berkeley. There's a lot of Berkeley connections here today, at UB for 25 years. So when teaching here at UB, she was looking at the kind of dichotomy of the relationship between nature and craft, and has a theory seminar looking at in-between landscape and architecture, and has a number of publications, awards, and projects that are related to that topic. Also, I think an interesting thread pulling through this, and I'm curious to see the reflection of this too in the Barcelona work, a relationship to a number of service organizations, including the Women for Human Rights and Dignity, which looks at the community of incarcerated women, and has looked at, or has led a project called the Community Design Service Project, where students are doing service work, doing some design and design work for different community organizations. So today we'll be hearing from Bonnie about the Barcelona program, which she's been involved with was involved with for many years, from 93 to 2011, directing it from 95 onward. And she's got some publications as well related to the work from that time. So those are your excellent panelists who will be providing some reflections based on their work. And to kick things off, what I thought I would do is just we go through and talk about some of these programs that we've done. Before I do that, I want to get a sense for who you are, because you have elected to come to this presentation. So can I just see how many people here are current students? Okay, great. I know we're all students alive, right? But currently enrolled UB students. How many have done, and this is everyone, not just current students, have traveled abroad through an international study abroad program or an exchange program? Okay. Do we have anyone who is not a native U.S. citizen? Okay, great. Because we'll talk about the interchange in both directions. I think both are really important. What else? And architects? Okay, planners? And some can write a stance twice. Okay, great. So just so we have a sense for who we all are as we embark on this conversation. So what I'll do is just talk for a couple of moments about the Costa Rica program. So the Costa Rica program, which I like to call by its actual program name, the Sustainable Futures Program. Just want to give you a couple thoughts about that, not to get too much into the weeds, but if there are questions that come up, sure, let's talk about those too. So an interesting thing about Sustainable Futures, which is in Costa Rica, which in fact is located in Monteverde, in the kind of central mountains of Costa Rica. Costa Rica is an interesting place, right? It has 5% of the world's biodiversity, but has 0.035% of the world's land cover. And that's not 3.5%, that's 0.035% of the world's land mass. So an intense concentration of valuable ecological resources, and has an interesting history too. After a period of kind of resource exploitation in the kind of colonial era of the Banana Republics, it became a real model for ecological practices. So the country holds 30% of its current landmass in reserve, produces 90% of its energy from renewable sources, and has regrown its forest cover from a low of 21% coverage of the country in the 80s to well over 50% of the country covered with forests now, as of the first decade of this century. So the program is focused in the Monteverde community, which is also a unique place, right? It's a very small town, a community itself of about 5,000 people that sits on the doorstep of this tremendously biologically important reservoir. So this cloud forest, this reservoir of ecological and biological diversity. Yet over 250,000 people visit this tiny, fragile ecosystem every year. And this is up from about 60 people visiting this community each year in the 50s. So tremendous explosion in tourism over the last decades into an ecosystem which is now incredibly taxed, but by a population which is largely transient and doesn't have as much ability to see or care about their footprint in the community. So there's some more images of what that looks like. So in kind of response to this complex and intense problem, the Sustainable Futures Program was started in 1995 by our current dean, Robert Shibley, and his partner, Linda Schneekloth. So looking to address problems unique to development in a particularly sensitive and fragile ecosystem. This is where most of the work takes place. A building like this, which itself was a design project by the Sustainable Futures Program. This is the studio space. And a couple of interesting aspects about Sustainable Futures in Costa Rica. One is a service learning program. So this is an experience where students go to Costa Rica in order to provide a service to the community as a consequence of their learning activities in the studio, in the seminars, in the other activities. So here we see students working with the community, presenting their work to the community as an offering of their best ideas for how to solve some of these challenges in that community. It's interdisciplinary and intercollegiate. This is a program started by a consortium of 5 universities. UB is one of those 5. And represents the disciplines of architecture and landscape architecture and planning, and the occasional engineer who will join this crazy crew. So we look at things from the scale of landscapes and buildings to systems, and both looking and doing landscapes, buildings, and systems. It's a collaborative program. It's very hands-on. In recent years, the program has taken on an attitude toward not only working in the community on paper, but working in the community with actual materials, so building things. This is a series of images of this project where we built these stone retaining walls on the Institute campus. And there again, you see the founders of the program right there in that image. So we build with stone, we build with bamboo. Recent project from the last couple of years, building with some more unusual building materials. Always on projects within the community with a sustainability focus. So we look at issues of energy, of water, of material usage, integration of habitat and other biological materials in architecture. And all this within quite a beautiful and unique landscape. So that's just a couple moments about Sustainable Futures. There's a lot more to say about that, but I do want to hand it over to our other panelists to give you a snapshot of their programs as well before we launch into a discussion. So next we were going to hear from Bonnie. Hey, where'd you go? There you are, right here. Okay. And let's talk about, again, from Bonnie, about the program in Barcelona. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Barcelona, 1989 to 2014. The program began as a worm in the brain of our late, great John Archie, an amazing guy who died in '93 while on sabbatical. Anyway, John's goal was to develop a program that would trace the Spanish roots of the architecture we see today on the west coast of the United States. And so he did a trial run in 1988. And his trial run was, and this again is tracing the Spanish roots, starting in Barcelona where Charlemagne stopped. I'm keeping you from seeing. Where Charlemagne stopped the Moors, going down to Andalusia, southern Spain, which was a Western caliphate for hundreds of years and has the finest examples of Moorish architecture, landscape architecture. Then on to Morocco to see Roman ruins, as well as really Moorish architecture, back into the Iberian Peninsula to Seville and stuff. And this is a quick run through of the southern tour. We would take a 11-hour train ride from Barcelona, get off the train to 105-degree temperatures in Cordoba, in Andalusia, where a bus would meet us, where we would. Cordoba holds this marvelous mosque that has been made into in the 15th century, a church was put in the middle of it. Outside of Cordoba is Medina al-Zahara, which was the playground for the caliphate at the time, but is, again, an excellent example. It's in ruins, but they're holding it together, of Moorish architecture. I am trying so hard not to talk about the architecture. 7 minutes, sorry. On to Granada, which in fact was the end place of the caliphate. The Alhambra and its attendant gardens, the Hamralife, are today the finest existing examples of Moorish architecture. And why don't you guys sit where you can see? Oh, you're right. That still exists. Huh?
You can touch it. Texas, we can have
Hamralife, and there are fountains and gardens. When I'm showing shops that have drawings, those are always drawings of our students. This is one of the paths from the Alhambra up to the Hamralife, then on to Ronda in the mountains, just above Cadiz, which is an absolutely beautiful city. And then we get to Algeciras and take the ferry across Gibraltar Straits and end up in Tangiers, where a bus will meet us. And we're on the bus forever. And we're driving through Morocco forever. And this is the kind of scenery that you see. It's beautiful. And very, very much like southern Spain. Then finally to Fez. This is the Medina in Fez. The famous dye works, which smell so bad because they use urine to tan the leather, that Chris Frungen was in the program for 2 years. They give you a sprig of mint to go in there so you could. And on our way back, we stopped at Meknes and Moulay Idris, which is a religious site. And we went up to Merida in Spain, in order to see Rafael Muneo's amazing museum of Roman antiquity and Seville. So, Barcelona, 25 years, 15 programs, 177 students. It's an 8-week program that is precisely designed the way a regular semester here is. 1 7-unit design studio and 2 3-unit seminars. Started out all graduate students, ended up with half and half. Anyway, and we split the program in half, so there's a week of travel in between the 2 halves of the semester, and students, after we stopped doing the southern tour, would go to interesting places on their own. But basically, we live in Barcelona, become residents rather than tourists, and use the city as a laboratory and as a classroom. When John started the program, he needed an assistant, so Javier Costa, a colleague in Spain, recommended Santiago Bravula, who has been with the program longer than anybody, 1989 to 2014. Santi has been indispensable. And if you ask any student who's been on the Barcelona program, Chris, they probably say wonderful things about Santi and then say, I learned about the duende from Santi, which is this particularly Spanish phenomenon. I'm going to be showing slides with the students' names on it and some of their living quarters. John found a mom and pop hostel in the Eixample district, not the old city, but a little bit uptown from that. And it was a big apartment with rooms broken up into really teeny little spaces. So students worked in the rooms, worked on their laps, found it bored on the street, did their drawings from that on their laps. This is the view from the hostel leader looking down the Rambla de Catalunya, which is where the hostel leader for 10 years was our home. In '99, Santi found us a unfurnished large apartment, and it was hilarious. We found on the street, garbage in Barcelona is wonderful. The stuff they throw away is great. We found, made, and bought whatever we needed to sleep on, work with, cook, so keeping the expenses down for the students so they could literally just live and be there as residents in Barcelona. Tonight, we're going to hear about Calatrava, so this is lovely. I don't have an actual photograph of the Olympic Tower that Calatrava did, but these are some of the drawings that the students did as interpretations of the Calatrava Tower. And, oh, how interesting is that? And the other one was the Sagrada Familia. Soon enough, we moved all the way down into the Gothic quarter. And it's because the IKEA movement started. People, especially Brits and the Germans, would come in and buy up these old apartments in the Gothic quarter, renovate them, and go to IKEA. Silverware to mattresses, they're lovely places. They really, the design, the quality of design in that city just can't be beat. The wonderful apartments, still use them today, or did until the end. Food became a really important thing. And so we had picnics and dinners, and because they had kitchens, they could fix us things. One year they did a tapas night, and the students made all the tapas out of these weird things like olives and hard-boiled eggs and sliced up and frankfurters chopped up. And I'm grateful to Dennis Maher, who took over the program in 12 and ran it for the last 3 years. And I want to point out specifically this middle slide. This is the way we ended up exhibiting our work for the probably for 10 years of the program. We would find places, or Santi would find, at the university, at design schools, Elisaba, at the Via Amatar. And this is I think in 2012, that's the way we would do reviews. This is the way we did reviews in 1989, 91, in the hostel leader. Students would be presenting their work. We'd paste things all over the walls. So I think it was a wonderful experience for the students because they had to make do. Otherwise, I was a cheapskate and made them live in cheap quarters and do stuff like that. But they could afford it. It was a very inexpensive program. So obviously, I'm not going to show you all sorts of things about Barcelona, but it's a huge city. And students draw all the time. So you'll see images of the Sagrada Familia, tons of daytime field trips up to Montserrat, where we did sketchbook reviews, to the fabulous Museo, the Palau de la Música by Dominique Montaner, modernist master. We went to monasteries, and a lot of Gaudi stuff, obviously. The Park Well, Colonial Well, a student presenting his seminar paper in front of the Sagrada itself. We went out to see Morales, Enrique Morales and Pinos, the fabulous cemetery about 2 hours out of town. And if I had more time, I could talk about this gentleman, Toshi Tanaka, who is knocking them dead back home in Japan now. Seminar. We used the city as a laboratory, literally. All our seminars were presented in some locale that the students were writing about. So all the projects, the seminars, the studios were based in the city. And Caron is doing his seminar presentation at the Fossa de la Petrolera, where the Civil War dead are buried in a mass grave on that lawn. I don't know what that is, I can't even see it. Another seminar. I'm just kidding. We did a tour of a factory at one time. The students were taught there's some remarkable small, teeny spaces in the Gothic quarter that are sort of hidden. Then Jose Buscalia, a colleague, taught us about optical perspective. We had students drawing with this duende, or this modernisme intent in mind, which is to student sketching, reviews at the Barcelona Pavilion. I got summer-long passes for the students there, so they could go there as many times as they wanted. Time to play at the fountain up on the side of Montjuic, and every year we celebrated 4th of July. Santi would find us sparklers, and that is our sparkler sign from 4th of July. And I'm going to end with a couple of projects to show you that we actually did studio projects. This project was in '95. It was a provisional theater for the Lycée, the Opera House, which had burned down 3 times in its long history. So the provisional theater was the studio assignment. This is one of the products. And remember, this is no computers, working on your lab or on a board, or finding a way to make a T-square. This next project is a retired housing for mariners in Poland, the old fishing villages, published in Eben, an international Sun magazine. This is a close-up of that project, Peony. We had students do sections. It was called urban dissections, and to do sections in both directions of the city, and then build models that were 8 feet long that they had to be able to transport back to Buffalo. So that was always interesting to see the way that they would do an enormous model that looked great and that could also be collapsed and brought back. And this is the last project I'm showing. It is Excavating the City, published in Inner Sight. 5, a winery digging under the ground, using the section of Barcelona, finding a way to insert within the city and use the underground as well as above ground. And these last 4 shots are, this is Barcelona through the eyes of the students. These are their photographs. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Bonnie. In the continuing unfolding of our introductions, I want to ask Camden to come on up and talk to us about the program of studying in Estonia.
Oh, it's a touch screen.
Hit control.
Sometimes they weren't going to tell you that until after you touched the 2 minutes.
There we go. So you can use all right, so Camden.
Okay, so I went to Estonia not this past summer, but one summer before that. So it's been pretty recent for me. And since then, I enjoyed my time so much. And it was truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience that I've helped Dr. Hess while he's in Estonia in promoting the program and talking about my experiences a little bit. So this is more of a program offered by the School of Architecture and Planning, but focused more on planning aspects, which is, I guess, kind of unique for the study abroad programs in this school. And it's on contemporary planning in Europe and comparative urban sustainability. And so this program has been offered the past 4 to 5 summers, and it's been run and organized by Dr. Daniel Hess, who's a professor in the planning department here at UB. The study abroad course offers lots of opportunities for learning about new cultures, acquisition of new environments, and engagement with the world that surrounds us every day. And so all those things I believe are critical components in education today, and it really helps prepare students to live and lead our globally independent society. So for those of you who may not know, the country of Estonia is located on the northeast part of Europe, highlighted in blue. And to give you a little more context, it's bordered by the Baltic Sea to the west, Latvia to the south, Russia to the east, and the Gulf of Finland to the north. And so when I told most of my family and friends that I was going to Estonia, most of them had never heard of it and had no idea that it was even a country. So let me give you just a little bit more info about Estonia. And all these photos were taken by either me or some of my colleagues that went to Estonia with me for one of our projects. So since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the Republic of Estonia has had sweeping social changes and fundamental shifts in its government and its economy. And so Estonia's membership in the European Union increases cross-border connections and trans-international interactions. And part of these interactions are probably aided a little by the fact that 3 people who created Skype are Estonians. So government policy and local infrastructure, which were formally developed and controlled under centralized policy constraints, have undergone significant geopolitical changes in the recent years. And these changes are reflected in the metropolitan spatial structure that exists in Estonia today, the design, the construction, and the use of the built environment by Estonians. So most of the course, which is 3 weeks long, takes place in Tallinn, which is the capital, Tartu, which is where the university is, that we collaborated with a lot of the students there, and a lot of the surrounding Baltic states. And so over the centuries, there's been numerous transformations as the country has undergone different forms of control, migration, fire, and war. And so because of that, the built environment of Estonia offers a really fascinating glimpse as to the coexistence of the pre-modern world, the modern urbanization, and postmodern eclecticism. And so there are lots of layers of tradition embedded in the architecture and embedded in the city planning that exists. And the built environment represents every phase of urbanization that's gone on from the 13th century in Europe all the way to current day, which is really unique for this place. So the study abroad course had tons of hands-on learning, first-hand experience of the history of architecture and the evolution of city planning. And it gave us exposure to new cultures, new people, and it includes a lot of guest lectures, discussions, tours, hands-on exercises, and lots of site visits. You're constantly, from the time you get up in the morning, or going out and learning about stuff, or just exploring till the time you go to bed. And so while some of the class time is devoted to lectures and tours and class time, you learn a lot from active experience and having the community as a laboratory, the community as a classroom, like Bonnie was mentioning with her study abroad program. So some of this active learning included going on walking tours of neighborhoods, observing street life, documenting observations, discussing issues, comparing urbanization patterns to what we experience here, and developing ideas for policy planning interventions. And so part of this included experiencing a lot of local cultures and local traditions and interacting with people in a professional and more social setting. And this included different experiences with some of the university students and some of the guest lecturers that came and wanted to hang out with us afterwards, which was fun. So this country really had a lot to offer. It was truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience, as I said. And it is organized and run by Dr. Daniel Hess. So if you have any questions, you can email him, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer them. And while there was a lot of fun, a lot of projects occur during this program, and a lot of it doesn't happen until you get back to the U.S. because you're so busy experiencing all that there is to see and do that you don't start to comprehend and start to kind of take in and reflect everything until you come back. So when you come back, you have all the assignments that you have to do to get your course credit, which include things like a journal scrapbook and a video assignment that you do on a planning topic of your choice. And then we also had a 48-hour studio challenge, which was really fun because we were paired up into teams with the students at the university. And so if you have the opportunity to go on a study abroad trip, I highly encourage it and have a great experience. So thank you.
Thanks, Kim. And so Ken, please come on up. You guys all want to travel now, don't you? Plane tickets right now. So let's hear from one more program. Yeah, just touch it.
Mine will be quite brief. I'll actually later in the semester be presenting to students about the Ireland program for next summer, and 3 other programs will be running, one in Spain. It's interesting. In the introduction, you mentioned, I had mentioned that my wife stayed home with 3 children as I went to Barcelona. My wife has a great statement. She says, every child has a different mother. And as Bonnie was presenting, I thought, John, Archie, and I had a very different type of relationship. I had known John as a young faculty member when I was at Georgia Tech. He knew I was fascinated with the kind of rise of architecture in Barcelona, despite the fact that there had been a dormancy under Franco. And he also, we were both fascinated by how Max Gaudi and Mary Lamb had, within a fairly stagnant architectural culture of Atlanta, but good building, had suddenly created their own ability to make great architecture. So in 2005, I was given the opportunity. It doesn't work as easy as it did. I'm going to just hit that, and then I'll just kind of point. There. No? I think just hit enter. There. I decided to start a program in Ireland. The architects, Sheila O'Donnell and John Toomey, had visited here. My wife and I had met them. I was fascinated with their work. I was fascinated with the fact that the city of Dublin, which had not had a history of strong architecture, had this group of people who are now in their mid-60s, but had a tremendous impact from the age of when they were in their late 20s and 30s in the reconstruction of the city. And how had they done that? How had they somehow built up this culture in which people were thinking about architecture and the contribution of architecture? My program circumvents the major cities of Ireland, stopping in each one. But it's also kind of fascinating because we look at some of the great monuments. Newgrange, the 2,400-year-old or 4,000-year-old passage tomb, but also how Ireland was invented. In other words, the mythologies of Irish literature and how they relate to architecture, and how some of this new generation of architects were able to kind of position themselves to suddenly create interesting architecture. Just keep hitting up. Which one? There we go. Good. All right. And the relationship of what is really a fairly weak Irish infrastructure, buildings superimposed by this robust militaristic presence of the British. And that fascinated me in the storytelling, so that we all know, well, nobody's ever read this. I actually have read Ulysses. But the opening passage of Ulysses occurs in a Martello Tower, because a Martello Tower is shows the presence of the British military in their lives. But by the time that Ulysses is written for James Joyce, that has passed, and now it becomes a kind of empty space, which later, obviously, in this case, becomes inhabited by people like Bohm, which is kind of a fascinating contemporary history. And the cities of Ireland, which are kind of narrated through this literary history, as opposed to the strong history we see in most Western countries. The history of Ireland is actually one of the superimposition of other powers on it. So the city is always being seen quite differently. But the insertion of literature in a country that what is fascinating about Ireland is that there's less than 6,000 people that inhabit the island of Ireland. There are more than 6 million people. There are more than 6 million people that visit every year. So there are more people that visit Ireland than actually live there. And this was Temple Bar, one of the most successful places in Western Europe, which was about to be torn down But the architects that helped start this program with me in 2005 were part of a group of architects that actually helped to restart the reconstruction of this. So the program is very much about how these architects, in a sense, got a foot in the door of the architectural culture, changed the culture, and then ultimately went on to be the kind of architects that are now on the short list for the Pritzker Prize by doing some pretty amazing buildings. This is a new, younger generation of architects who are now at the forefront of sustainability. This is a project that's now 10 years old, but the use of cross-laminated timbers and low-land beams, and kind of visiting of all these projects as we go around the island, looking at this, looking at these amazing landscapes, the sensitivity of the Irish island. You know, with 6 million people, an influx of 6 million people, how does this country does this really amazing job of getting people around to understand its country, the stories they invent, without sometimes the health and safety barriers you find in our country. But also, in going to Northern Ireland, showing the kind of difficulties, the political difficulties, the impact socially, the kind of impact upon ultimately architectural culture, and how there's a certain retarding quality to the conflicts of Northern Ireland, which prevents it from being the kind of vibrant architectural community that you see in the Republic of Ireland. But even within that, some interesting projects. This is actually a small project in Sligo, which is a Gaelic-speaking part of Ireland. And then the amazing Giant's Causeway. And then back to what I call the kind of the real problems of Ireland as it undergone incredible economic development. It started taking on all of these structures that were quite foreign to Dublin itself. So the program is very much about looking at all of these forces, how architectural has emerged within a country that did not necessarily have an architectural culture before that. It involves a great deal of reading, looking at critical writings on the topic, but then also sketching and model building work. It's expanded. We now have an exchange program with University College Dublin for 1 or 2 people to go each semester. I just wanted to open it up.
Great, thank you, Ken. So I'll ask the panelists to come up so we can have a discussion reflecting on some of these. I also wanted to point out, just for those of you who are very close readers of your program, Vice Provost Stephen Dunnett was not able to join us for the panel today. So that's not an oversight. We're not waiting for him to walk in the door. He actually won't be able to join us today. So we'd like to discuss some of the threads that came through a number of these projects and think about this in the context of our school. So a couple of facts for us just to kind of situate these many different places back into where we are here at UB and within the School of Architecture and Planning. So UB is kind of unusual in that about 12% of UB students study abroad, which is 6 times the national average of those kinds of programs in universities. So we have a very high number of people who leave from here and go elsewhere. In the architecture department, I'm not sure what the number is, the percentage. Ken might have an idea. I think it's closer to half to 2/3, would you say, of our students who go over?
Depending on how you calculate it, about 1/3 of the juniors are maybe close to, about 1/3 of junior students go after their junior year, and then considering the 3.5-year program and graduate program, it's closer to that.
So it's an exceptionally high percentage of people. So this isn't just a kind of fringe community. This is part of who we are at UB and part of who we are in the School of Architecture and Planning. So in that note, one of the first questions I wanted to kind of pose to the group for discussion and then for reflection within the whole group in the room is that, we know, I think we can accept as a given that international study and travel gives us experiences, gives our students experiences and exposure to the rest of the world, and teaches students about their roles as global citizens. But I'm curious about the extent to which it makes us better designers, better architects and planners. So if I can use that as a kind of opening question, how does this attitude that we have of looking outward and going outward, how does that change what we do in the acts of making, in the studios, in our seminar classes, in our ways of looking at and making the built environment? And then maybe some speculation to the extent that we can, how is this different from the other disciplines? What is it unique? What do we bring to either the study abroad or the reflection upon it that makes us better designers? Yeah.
In preparing for this, I went back to a paper I wrote in '99, and this is, to me, the most important reason to send our students abroad. And as Heidegger says, it is the paradox of not being able to see something if you are within it. He asks us to transcend the enframing lens through which we see the world, because we only can see things through the influence of ourselves. You can't really see what you're looking at because the tool you use, your own experience, your own past, is distorting the way that you see what's happening. When we bring our people abroad and we really live places for 8 weeks at a time, all of a sudden the tool that you can use is expanded. And in some way, we can transcend that enframing lens because we have given ourselves the opportunity to see things through another set of eyes that aren't ours. And by living a life in Ireland or Costa Rica or Barcelona or China, I think that it's a critically important thing happens. People begin to realize that, oh, I don't know everything the way I thought it was supposed to be. I mean, I've always thought things were this way or that way. And when you live someplace else, and especially if you surround yourself with the architecture and design and food and customs and cultures of a place, you're able to break that constraint. And hopefully our students bring it back and they are able to bring it to their work and to be able to look at their own work through a different set of eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I guess since you covered the philosophical view, I would, on a practical level, I think that there's a generation of students who grow up. We look at art daily, we find all of these images. But in traveling, especially in a place like Ireland, you see them firsthand and you see the difference. So the images at the end, which were not by Irish architects, but by more world famous architects, there's something very profound when our students see the work of a local architect like Toomey and O'Donnell, the kind of scale that they're thinking of things, the sensitivity to that community that they lived in, that they had to fight to get people to understand what would be destroyed, and then to work on projects that did not have big budgets. And then you go to the Docklands and see these projects by firms from the United States or London that I won't name, and you see a kind of indifferent, almost arrogant scale. And I think that that's where I think certain programs can be, because that's the same kind of experience I had in Barcelona, right? I mean, to see Rafael Moneo's project in Emerita is amazing. There's nothing in the photographs that prepared me for seeing that with John, to seeing its scale. And you can't get that in the screen in front of you.
If you actually go and see some of the local architects, things like that, Oscar Tusquets is actually not that well known in other parts of the world, but he's certainly well known in Barcelona, and the things he does is spectacular.
Yes.
So, seeing local architects in their places.
And to put it in a generation, right? So that these architects that I'm talking about, understand that there was an architect, a generation before them that never got the opportunity that they had. But, that generation had come here. They had worked for Con, they had worked for Ventura, they came back. They taught these young architects. And they, what's interesting is they stepped aside and didn't try to board all of that, and I think that's so creating great architecture outside of the large cities, I think is as much about understanding that you develop the culture. And what I like to say is you create the clients. You create the desire for architecture. And that's where I think that those architects in Barcelona did.
Just because I've spent a lot of time in those places, I've lived in some of those places, but how often do you intermix, and you talk about going to Barcelona, and it doesn't sound like you ever, maybe you do, you meet with the people from the School of Architecture, talk to them, understand what they're doing, understand what affects them. Do you actually get a chance to do that? Because it's a much different approach.
We did.
Yeah. The Friday of our second week, the last couple of years, and when I kind of designed the program around that, the University College Dublin has their end of the year party. And, so I made a mistake this year in that we had to get on a train to Cork the next day, and all of our students had stayed over in the apartments of students from University College Dublin. But to see the difference, and also, I think our students appreciate what we do well. The technology here at our school is pretty amazing. To see the difference, and then to talk about the difference. So, yeah, it's not just that. And we also have a growing relationship with Limerick on the other side of Ireland, which ironically is actually their director grew up in Brockport. It's a small world, but it's kind of interesting to see all those connections.
I think from a planning perspective too, it's seeing not just how the country focuses on day-to-day activities, but seeing how their history has evolved and seeing and appreciating the rich histories that exist over in other countries. And I also got an advanced certificate in historic preservation while I was getting my master's here, so I really appreciated the historical side of what Estonia offered, but it's seeing what works and what doesn't work for other countries and comparing it to what we've seen work and not work in our own country. And then I think taking from the opening ceremony and what the dean was saying, really trying to combine the best of the old with the best of the new, and in ways that function for everyone, regardless of country, regardless of age, regardless of race, and regardless of income. And so I think it's important to recognize, because America's history is really, when you look at it and compare it, is so short compared to other countries. And so really recognizing that planning and architecture is not a stagnant point in time, but it really evolves and it is dynamic, and appreciating that and having your eyes open to that by almost stepping back in time in a sense is a great experience.
You bring up a really good point, and something happened one year. I don't know which year it was. We did involve ourselves with the university. There, Estad Elizaba, there's so many letters and so many names. And on the hill, I can't name the exact university. Anyway, we were doing a review once and we invite the faculty of these various institutions to come and be critics for our reviews. And this particular review, I don't know, Chris, maybe you were even there. The project was to take things that they found in the city and do things with them, and to makeshift, basically, to take things you find and give them purpose and use. So we're there, we have this review and this wonderful space, and all of these faculties, and the head of the department got up and said, "I think this is nonsense. I think this is absolute nonsense. I don't understand what you're doing. well, what do you mean taking trash and making something out of it? And he walked out of the review. And those things are really important for young people to see. That there are, even within the places that we visit, or within, people have a wide variety of views about the way one should conduct an architecture program or a project or this or that. So what that experience, I think, taught the students more than anything is tolerance. You know, a kind of tolerance. Here you are visiting another country, and the head of the school gets up and walks out of a review, dissing what we were doing. Well, and I see Corey down here, and I know that you know exactly those kinds of projects, because we used to do that when you were our students. And we thought we knew what we were doing, because we thought this was about architecture. So what happens is we brought something to them that they hadn't seen, and they didn't know what to do with. And I mean, it's both ways. The influence runs in both directions.
Sure, you touched, it's funny, Kenneth, you kind of touched on a few key points that I want to pick up on with another question to you. So one, you know, this example, the anecdote that you just told Bonnie about, the experience of being in a review and having someone from a different perspective give you some feedback on your work, which is different from another review where you might have a professor who says, well, I don't think you've done anything good here. Having that in a different cultural context might bear some different meaning. But I'm curious, my question is really about how is this study abroad experience through these trips, how is this distinct from simply traveling and simply touring, right? So architecture does have a big history of the grand tour and going and sightseeing, and a lot of what we do when we go abroad is to see, and you mentioned the idea of the new eyes that you get from seeing new things, or a level of scale of work, or a type of work, or getting in to see projects and hear from people. So where is the unique value in going with a group and being led and guided in a structured program versus bringing a critical eye and traveling alone? Where are the unique offerings? And I think both have value, and that's not to say one is, you know, one is where we're going to come out of this and say this is all we need to do, but where are the lines between simply travel and study abroad?
I would start by going back to what I said before, is that there's a danger that we have an easy access to too much information, and it does not become a part of us, it does not transform us. So I would not say that the Grand Tour was simply sightseeing. The Grand Tour were architects who, at a time where reproductions were quite primitive, books were not as accessible, they went to a site and they would see a building and know that they would never see that building again. And they sat there and they sketched and they looked for a long time. And what they took away from that was a new perception of that building different from what they had read. And that was an authorship, because there's a translation. And I think that kind of traveling and sketching and making students do collages is a profound experience, especially when they're reading about these experiences. You know, what is the difference in the homogeneity of Irish culture, right, versus America, and how do they see that? And you know, so I think that it's the exercise, right? In other words, that simply looking on the web, it's often hard to get students to go deeply unless you ask them a series of questions and give them exercises. This takes us into the field.
So as part of the program itself is like a speed bump, kind of slowing people down.
Exactly.
To give them more time and to sit with intention and to experience. And I like the question or the approach that I will never see this building again. Or if you take that attitude, yes, you can, now we know we can go and find images of it. But
and the difference between cities, in Camden talk, the difference between cities. So why is it that Limerick, Ireland suffers? As opposed to Galway and Cork, which are cities, and each has equal access to tourism, and therefore could have flourished. You know, is its relationship to the sea? Is its relationship to law enforcement, in which there was organized crime? You know, by dealing with a series of cities that are small enough, students can understand the difference. They can understand the subtle difference and then be able to reflect on their own city. To have a program in New York or Rome, as a friend of mine did, is to me less exciting, right?
Well, you know, the obvious thing is that would distinguish a tourist from a student. And actually, I think the Estonia program perhaps does this the best, and that's the mix that you have with the people that live there. It's like you were working with the people as opposed to being your own independent entity, you know, burning the midnight oil in your apartment and then having a review with perhaps some of the locals. But, and I do believe that I've had the pleasure of joining the Costa Rica program as well. And, but I did not get the impression that there were a lot of Costa Ricans that were involved in the design, and perhaps you could address that. But the idea of making it, not being a tourist is getting to know the people. Tourists don't get to know the people. They don't get in arguments. I mean, polite arguments with the people.
And I think, I think we need to try and encourage travel more, regardless if it is as a tourist or it is as a student, because I think coming from a student background, you'll naturally be wanting to know more, wanting to ask questions, and because that was what we found when we traveled before and after, because if we're already paying for tickets out to Europe, we might as well travel to other places other than we're studying abroad. And I think so many students have such a limited perspective on things. We think it's a lot bigger than it is just because we do have access to the internet. We have access to 360-degree videos now where you can pretty much put yourself in a place and think you're there. But it's so much different when you're actually there, and I think, I don't think that's the fault of the students, and I don't think that's the fault of the faculty, but I think it's more of a downfall in the education system, and we think that a classroom is like this great setting to teach these things, and I think we need to start opening up the doors and breaking down classroom walls and really using the idea that the community is a classroom or the landscape is that laboratory. And I think that the amount of information you can get through travel, whether it is as a tourist or whether it is as a student, really encourages that gathering of information and that collaboration that needs to happen in order for us to progress.
About 6 weeks into the first Ireland program, I had the students going 5 days a week out to the University College Dublin to a great studio space. I realized this is bizarre. With students, to take students, 3,500 miles and then place them in a studio. And since then, I haven't done that. I kind of reflected back upon how John Archie did it in the walls of the Hostile Leader, and found that it's much more effective. And what it also forces is, and it's related to your question, is it forces students to be able to develop products that are portable, to not, try to get them away from their computer and thinking that they have to have the proper programs, developing models and three-dimensional work that can only fit into a cigarette case. That's what we've done most of the time. But if there's a student that smokes, it has to be smaller than their cigarette case. So whatever we do.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question because, Bonnie, to your point earlier, the Costa Rica program does feel at times more like an exchange program in that we're transplanting students and placing them in largely a fixed location for the 10 weeks of the program, and we work with clients directly and have regular meetings with clients from the community. We have consultants from the community, so we do have a deep integration. Students live with families in the community, so they're very much putting down roots in that community. But we fight this question of having a studio space, and to your point, we're picking them up out of one studio and putting them in another studio. So we're doing that and trying to establish them, and at the same time get them out of there and into the landscape or into the community to work differently. And we fight the preciousness of the architectural drawing and the architectural model and the desire for beautiful representation versus communicative representation, and something that you can do in sketching by hand versus what you build with So there's some tension between that, I think, certainly in the Costa Rica program. I did want to offer the chance for Corey to speak on this too. In addition to many other international experiences, Corey's also taught in Costa Rica and has brought people out of the studio and very specifically into the community to do work, slowing them down and doing handwork and sketching and filling books full of graphic materials. Did you want to offer any comments? Not to put you on the spot, but if you okay.
The topic of tourism is interesting because one of the articles my students read is by Richard Ingersoll called "The Internationalism of the Tourist," and it's interesting because I've started to move that reading up because then the students they become, they love going on a bus tour, right, to Newgrange because then they come back and they are looking at it for what was manufactured, what was invented is what we talk about. How is it? Is that the real history, or is that the history that will sell? And they become, when you start pointing this out, students, when they, I think, do some critical reading, actually become very aware of things. A certain kind of cynicism is not bad when you're actually kind of following around with some of the past, and especially in a country like Ireland, where the entire country, one could argue, is structured that way.
We kind of had the same thing where we did a reading very similar to that, where it was like, what is tourism versus what is traveling and experiencing what there is out there. And so we would go to the old town because that's where you get dropped off in those places. And the old town is very much, you've got everyone trying to sell you everything, and it's very manufactured in a sense. And so we would always try and find a local or meet someone that would be like, what bar do the locals hang out at? Or where are the cool hip places? Like we found this one little area that used to be an old warehouse district that got turned into cafes, and they would set up ping pong tables outside and like hanging swings, and it became a pop-up park essentially. And that was where everyone that didn't know about Old Town was hanging out. And so really trying to find what's not obviously right in front of you.
Well, that's what's amazing, with the new media. Right?
Well, that's
So
where
you can find that.
I think that's where the garbage comes in, the trash, the stuff that's people throw away. That they have no use for something. They stick it on the corner. Who knows when the pickup days are? But frankly, if I really wanted to get to know a place, I'd go straight to the garbage. I'd go straight to the place to find out, well, what are people throwing away and not using? What if they deem to be useless? Stuff like that. It's like finding a favorite bar or something. But it's those teeny little parts of life. How to use public transit. How to be polite or not polite. Do you give way? It's like learning a new language when you study another culture's behavior.
It's called culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's called culture.
That is culture.
I mean, at the end of the day, why one goes to these places to understand the culture and what the impact of the culture has to do with the architecture.
Exactly.
I'd like to add something from experiences, just because
Bonnie Foy Albert has been
so wonderful to do this. I was an exchange scholar in China in 1989. I was there in Beijing, in Tiananmen Square, just before the revolution started. We got out, and then I came back because I was supposed to be teaching. I was going to teach Chinese students about historic preservation and so on. Well, when we got out, I had to go back. So in 1995, and I'm just saying this because of the culture that I saw, we went with an exchange scholar, Walter Nahn, who was here in the 80s. And I went with my husband and with the photographer, and we went to the most beautiful sites I've almost ever seen. Yeah, I did a book on China's sacred sites, thanks to Walter. But when you go into the remote areas of China and you see the nature, the beautiful valleys, the mountains, the pathways, the pagodas, And when you see how the Chinese designed their architecture to fit in with and celebrate nature, it's a cultural, can I say, combination that is so beautiful. And I think one of the problems we have now in terms of architecture is we don't always take the site quality and the beauty and the depth of the site and celebrate it in the architecture that works well in tandem with it. And so I think I would love to see students go to China to go to some of these remote spots. But if we go to Leishan, you're going to see a 230-foot high Buddha carved out of the rock strata on this island, and you're going to be very, very impressed by how the Chinese work. And then the other thing the Chinese did very well was they had Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And Confucianism was kind of looked at as a study that combined other philosophies. So when you went to these sites, you would see how that philosophy was celebrated in the building types. And it was not about one versus another, Buddhism versus Taoism. It was about temples that were connected together, or sites, outdoor sites, that celebrated the kind of naturalism of Taoism, or something like that. So there's a lot to learn out there in these beautiful places. And the other thing that was strange, Mao Zedong, did the Cultural Revolution and the walk. Well, he destroyed a lot of the cultural spots, the historic spots. But these places were never reached by him because they were more remote. And the other nice thing was, not only are they still there, but there are some tourists that will come and go, but they're not over-commercialized in terms of tourism. So I just wanted to add that because I like it so much. It was such a...
So, I think sometimes you didn't have the value of an introduction. So Bonnie Foyd-Albert is one of our first faculty members, founding faculty member here at the school. She also is a terrific architect who, I believe, once at a certain point in the 1990s had the largest woman-owned architectural engineering firm in the United States. So I think the students should know that.
And the very best place to work. The people
Yes.
that work for her
Yeah.
aren't unhappy.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a wonderful profession, and let's hope it doesn't get so commercialized and so, non-personal. And it's one of the things I wondered about. Is we're seeing design build coming in, contractors have internal architects, but it's more about builds in some ways. So I think the profession is really needed now. We really need to get out there and go according to appreciation, of what we have in nature and the cultures that breed some of these sites. I think it's really nice. Thanks, John. Thank you.
Well, thank you for everything.
I love you.
Anybody has a recommendation for the next, how to integrate some of the experiences we have or experiences to integrate into the program for the UB architecture for international studies? Any kind of recommendation that we can get some derivation from all your
As the person
experiences?
who's working at the university level, the question comes back the other way, is that they are so happy with our programs, the history of our programs, how that's developed, how our programs work, the engagement, the number of students that they're asking us, how can they use that model in other departments? To give you some idea, last spring, 12 students started who graduated early by taking a summer abroad after their junior year started in the master's program, and then are able to condense their total line of education. So I think we're always looking at how to integrate this, but in some ways, the way our programs work and the way that they started, actually the Costa Rica program was before Barcelona, right? It was about 86.
Actually, it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was?
No, we started a year before.
Okay.
That's all.
But those programs.
We were kind of at the same time.
So-
Yeah, at the same time. And what's wonderful is how incredibly different they are. Because Costa Rica is service-oriented, really puts you in touch with, okay, get down to work. We have to do something here that's real, physical, and is constructed, and will leave an impact forever in that part of Costa Rica. Whereas Barcelona is not, it's not at all like that. How do you leave your imprint in a city of 3 million people?
1,000 designers everywhere.
Yeah.
Frank Fontuzzi, who came with us one year, did a project in which, for his seminar, and he wanted the students to develop something to leave behind that, not necessarily indelible, but that people would bump into, other people would see. In other words, leave something of us behind there, rather than trying to find something that we've never seen before and bring it home. So I think there's a lot of, in a way, in this global culture, and there's so much travel, international travel, and it's sort of getting homogenized a little bit. If you go the tourist route, no matter what country you're in, there's a HAYES that you could stay at, and you know where what's going to be in the salad bar. But so that tendency is something I think that I hope that we can work against. In other words, in order to find underneath the surface of these cities that cater to outsiders.
Yeah, actually, I want to pick up on that, and I think we're getting to the end of our time. We started a little late because the previous session ran late. This could either cascade into everything running late, or we can end a little bit early. But to kind of tie things up a little bit, I did want to ask for some speculation about some of the change that you've seen over the time that you've been involved in the project, these programs, in order to give us some kind of indication of where we might be going. So Camden, you mentioned the question about what it means to go somewhere when you can do a 360 tour online. We have the availability of so much consumable photographic information, as Ken mentioned, and certainly we're in this era of globalization and homogenization of the commodified experience and going abroad and living the same kind of quarter secret back home. So things have changed. Things have changed, particularly in communication technologies, within the last 10 years, certainly within the umbrella of these programs. So I'm curious how, and I've seen this even in the 5 years I've been working with the Costa Rica program, how I'm hearing about what the Barcelona students are doing in real time. Right here we are, we're in this community that's in the middle of the rainforest, and I'm getting updates on their studio projects on the other side of the world. So we're very, very connected, even when we're here in Buffalo, and then when we go abroad. If we're connected everywhere we go, what is the unique experience of that travel? How do we leverage those communication technologies to improve study of the travel experience, or do we try to get around them or subvert them or hold them at bay? So I'm kind of curious for some speculation on what you've seen in the last few years, given these kind of trends of communication, globalization, and where that might lead us in a force of resistance or a force of acceptance and embracing. Yes, follow on to that.
I've actually never been on these programs, but what I've noticed through all the presentations is that none of them just say, hey, let's just have studio in Spain and having a good time. All these programs take full advantage of their location and what's really special about that. And that might be one of the secrets to success compared to the university-wide programs, which I've noticed have been, hey, take a UB class in Greece, it'll be a good time. You really tap into the locale. So in Costa Rica, what's so special about that? Well, they've really figured out a lot about sustainability. We can learn a lot by working with them. And Ken was talking about how the architecture in Ireland is so interesting because of the varied history. Estonia just has this patchwork of powers that have controlled it, and their relationship with identity in the Soviet and post-Soviet era has just molded the landscape, and there's so much to learn there. And Spain is another place where so many cultures have collided, and it's had to change a lot. And you're not just there to like look at pretty buildings, take pictures, and learn about them, I guess. But you're really there to experience them and talk to the people who have relationships.
I'd like to comment on that in a slightly different way as well. You mentioned that in Costa Rica that you stay with the people, you stay in their homes. Do any of the other programs do that?
They're staying in hospitals in Ireland, so they're constantly coming in contact with not only but there are people from Germany and Sweden.
There was one question I had because I've stayed in other people's homes and other people's countries, and I think that that is something that has an important role in exchange because it provides a whole different level of intimacy with regards to people, culture, and it really brings to light some core differences and how that can inform not only architecture but your life and so forth. But another kind of exchange that I've been personally thinking about is domestic exchange, even within our own cities, to look at cross-cultural, socioeconomic, and language within our communities. So, for example, rural, suburban, and to bridge those barriers because they're very real, and I think that that could have a tremendous impact on our local communities, but not only our local communities, but that could inform our what we do and how we think about when we go elsewhere as well. And in relation to that, another huge phenomenon that's happening is the refugee crisis all over the world, and engaging that as in light of exchange. How do we look at that and learn from that in terms of exchanging of culture and looking at how do we break down those barriers and learn from them and make that an opportunity. Those are some of my thoughts. Oh, and I think a key component of why I'm bringing this up is because I think there's a great opportunity with all of the emerging markets and changing economies that are coming up because of new building codes, sustainability. All of these new, the world and construction is all going to change immensely in order to achieve those goals. And I see this as an immense opportunity for addressing poverty and training people who are underprivileged and don't have access, training them in these new professions, because everybody has to learn them anyways. So why don't we all learn them together and work on emerging the world out of poverty in our own people in our own cities.
I like the ideas that they've been in domestic exchange that isn't just about international travel to get the kind of the experience of exchange and the eye-opening and some of the cultural experience that we talked about. Great, thank you for those comments. I know the natives are getting restless outside the door. Everybody
Do you know any of that? I have a friend here who has done study like programs. I'm going to add, out of Jamestown Community College. No.
I know, I really like what you said about this idea that, you know, this phenomenon of migration, right? And architecture is so much about place and how do we accommodate place for that kind of movement moving forward. That was a really interesting statement, but no, I don't know overall if I have anything to add to the discussion other than, I think it's really, you know, also really interesting too to think about when we're doing these programs, how Bonnie so aptly discussed, you know, this encounter with difference forces us to broaden that toolbox, you know, that we have, so we can approach disciplines in a way that, you know, gives us a broader perspective, but at the same time, you know, it expands our materials, you know, so we have an expansive materials and expand our toolbox, but then at the same time too, how do we prepare our students to be able to deal with that? You know, that's the other question that I always have when I'm dealing with these programs is, you know, are they ready? I think you touched on that too. You know, that's interesting because you're not just going abroad, you know, you're going abroad and really trying to experience that place and the people, and sometimes it's a rupture that happens, you know, so how do you deal with that rupture and then orient students to be, you know, productive and creative and all that stuff. Interesting conversation.
It's been the last 20 years traveling. That's been my job. I've worked in, I don't know how many countries. I lived in Barcelona for 5 years. I lived in Tokyo for 2 years. I've done work in China for 15. I've done work in the Middle East. What I've learned through this is that every culture has its own aspect, and what you're learning when you go there is what they offer you, which is different than what you know. But to understand what they're talking about lets you grow. And if you don't catch that when you're traveling over there, I mean, the idea of being a tourist, people go with cameras. The idea of taking a piece of paper, sitting down and drawing it, gets you more in tune with that subject than anybody will ever do with a camera. And the idea of going from place to place and understanding and having somebody talk about the history and all those elements is a great tool. The idea of being in a studio, you might as well be here and get the pictures. I mean, the idea of going over there is about learning about the place and interacting, and that's why I asked about having students from other places, not for but actually working with them. Because what I worked in Barcelona for the Olympics, around the Olympics from 1990 to 1995. We had one of the people I was working with was Ricardo Bofield. And one of the guys I was working with was Jim DeStefano, who was running the Skidmore office in London, and he said something to Bofield about, well, you got to learn how to draw this way. And all Bofield did is he looked at him and said, you know what, Jim? We've been doing this for 400 years here. I think we know how to build a building. And that was kind of telling the story. I mean, you know, each person and each place has its culture and the way they do things. If you can learn from that and grow however you want to grow, I think you really picked up on something. Can all of that transfer back and forth? I don't think so. The idea of you know, the whole Syria thing and all the people coming through, that isn't just architects. It's like so many other elements that are involved in this. I mean, we're doing some stuff on resiliency and those kinds of sustainability. It's a lot of work, and if you get that much, you've done a lot. And to talk about the big picture, it's a great big picture, but you're doing little pieces at a time. You guys are doing a great job. It's great to do that and to see that.
Okay, great. Thank you for the thoughts, and thank you everyone for the questions and comments. But help me thank our panelists. We've got a